We are on, as it says in this book, Granville Tyler book, we're in that lesson number 3, dealing with Genesis 11 down through Genesis 15, and so we'll look at that for a little while this evening. One of the things that I've tried to do with our classes as we have preacher training is to get them to know the overview of a book. We're going to be talking about Genesis and Exodus. We're going to do it in overview fashion, so this is a good time for you to put these things into use. One of the things I tried to do every time I was going through a book was to learn something that I could say, okay, this chapter has this. And when you're trying to find Bible verses and you can go through chapters of the Bible, I mean, you may say, well, that's impossible. It's not. It's pretty easy, really. If you learn it by chapters, each book, and you think what it is, you may miss a chapter or two, but you can figure it out if you know overall the plan there for the chapter. All right, let's just go back and review so far, okay? Chapter 1, what's that about? All right, it's about the creation there. Chapter 2. Do what? Chapter 2. Got to speak louder. I can't hear. Okay. The creation of man and woman especially being pointed out there. Garden of Eden is noted at that place. Chapter 3, sin enters the world. The consequences given that they came to death at that point, and also the plagues that were brought upon the serpent, the woman, and the man as well. Chapter 4, what's that about? Do what? All right, that's about Cain killing Abel. It then goes on. That just introduces the evil that you see spreading. And so there you have Lamech and his 2 wives and some other things there. It goes over the evil starting to happen more and more. Chapter 5, what's it about? Do what? Genealogies, okay, from Adam to Noah that you have there. Chapter 6, what's it about? All right, Noah and the what? Ark. What about it? Building. All right, the building of it. This is the start. The building up unto the destroying of the world. He builds the ark. If it's about building the ark in chapter 6, what's chapter 7 about? All right, them coming into that ark, the flood beginning. If it's beginning in chapter 7, what's chapter 8 about? All right, you have that flood abates and Noah and his family leave the ark. All right, chapter 9, if that's about leaving, what do they do when they leave the ark? All right.
Start the farm and the meat for food.
Okay, meat for food. What else? All right, the rainbow that's there, that man allowed to eat animals, and the covenant of the rainbow given. Chapter 10. What's chapter 10? Okay, we have genealogies again. Dwelling place of Noah and his sons are also dealt with there with regard to the spreading out after that flood. We're going to look at chapter 11 through 15, obviously, at the end of the lesson after we've gone through it. All right. Tell me a story, chapter 11. What's it about? Tower of Babel is where we start off. What were men intending to do? All right. Build something that would reach to the heavens. Why did they decide to do that? Okay.
They wouldn't lose each other.
Pardon?
They wouldn't lose each other.
All right. Why were they worried about that? What drew them close during this time? All right, they spoke the same language, so they had that same type of sense of a tie there with one another. Have you ever noticed that people that speak the same language have a tendency to overall carry a certain attitude about life, a certain predisposition about things, different things that are important to them? Idea or language comes from ideas. God gave the speaking of those ideas into the various languages, But men, as they use those languages, have changed them in various ways. You notice the difference between various ancient languages, and you can see the difference between the people. I don't think there's a real way of knowing much about the history and detail of a people without having some knowledge of a language of it, because it gives you the idea of what's important, those things that are coming into their thoughts, how they think about them, and so forth. So you have this confusion of the languages that takes place there. What else? We had said there was something else after that, through the latter part of the chapter. Okay. Genealogies are in there and talk about those genealogies, usually given as the generations from so-and-so to so-and-so. That's pointed out. When you go back and you look at these, I want you to notice these are structured. The question is, if you go back and you look at all of the statements from Genesis chapter 4 and onward, and you take the years and you add them up, Bishop Usher did a chronology and said it was in 404 BC that there was the creation. Well, that would be true if that's what was meant by all of those. However, there's some very clear points missing in the genealogies that you have when you compare them between Genesis and what you see in Chronicles, for instance. A number of people are missing that are there, and then some are missing that you have before. You find out some of them are actually grandfather of the one named or great-grandfather of the one named. And so when you look at it, you notice there were gaps. Well, one of the easy ways to find out, was that ever intended like that? I want you to notice what happened in the first part of the genealogy. You had the first one, Adam what? Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. How many generations? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, did that just happen to come out like that? Real convenient, 10? 10's a number of a completeness in Hebrews. Or in the Hebrew system. It's seen as that which is a number of mankind as well. And so you start to look at that and you say, now is that 10 total, or is that 10 that are meant as standing for the rest, standing for all, and not meant to be a total, complete kind of a statement of genealogy? I don't know. I very much doubt that it is intended to be a total one because of all of the additions and subtractions that you find elsewhere. 10 is put there in that case as a sense of these people, what happened during this time, lining up events by that genealogy. But let's look at this next one here. Now, Noah, which son of his is it that we have this genealogy through? All right, we've got Shem, and then we've got Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Nahor, or Serug, Nahor, Terah, Abram. How many? That 10 tends to give you another point. This is structure. This isn't just talking about a complete history. This is giving a structure to this. This is typical of Hebrew writing, that they would give a number and then another number there and get that number paralleled both ways. That's just parallelism as you see it, repeatedly used all through the Old Testament. For whatever it's worth, I would suggest to you that's not intended to tell us the entirety of the dating of it. It gives that kind of a sense of what you have. Now, what I know about from Adam to Noah, what's that stand for? I mean, what happened between Adam and you get the time of Noah? What happened to the world?
Destroyed and destroyed.
All right. You had it created good. God said everything is very good when he finished. But it ends up what? Very evil, and where all the thoughts were only continually evil before God by the time you get here. Okay, now we've got a world recreated. He put Shem in. And now what are you pointing to with Abram? There's a hope that's coming in. Here you have no hope that takes place. There's a hope that's here. Why? Because he's leading towards one of a fateful vine, if you will, through which to bring about that which is for the best of mankind, the bringing about of this one who is a Messiah. It had gone down in the first 10. Now we've got a hope that's there through Abraham. All seeds, or all the people of the earth would be blessed through Abraham's seed. And so you're seeing that differentiation of those two different lineages of 10 standing for the whole of that. Go ahead.
So if that was the case, why go through the details of saying exactly how old somebody was when they were born and how exactly long they lived after that? What's the purpose of the years if we're just talking about a generational event?
You got my next question. Now, what's the answer? What does that tell you? However old they lived. I mean, Methuselah, 969. By the way, Methuselah is a case in point which I sometimes wonder about. You take the date that Methuselah dies as given of 969, that turns into the first year of the flood when you do the chronology and compare them. I'm not real sure about that. It may have been intended as a point. But when you look at each of them, even Methuselah living 969, what happens then? He dies. So however long it's there, you've had death that's entered in. And when you look at all of those deaths, all of that compounded time, what do you have? Well, in the case of the first 10, you have all of it pointing out, here we are, but we're lost. There isn't any hope. God's going to destroy the world. With the next one, you find it moving in the other direction, even though what? What do you notice about times of living comparatively? They're starting to get shorter the further we go. The first ones ended up with problems. It was evil continually. But then you start getting shorter, there starts to be some message of hope. Now, it's not going to last all the way. But I'm just wanting you to notice that through the first part of Genesis. That seems to be a point that is being made as we go through that. The other things are, when you go through the genealogies, do you notice something about during even the most evil time that there's some hope that's there? Who out of this list walked with God? I mean, before Noah. All right, Enoch walked with God. He was not, for God took him. So even in the worst times there's some hope that exists there that God puts to those who will follow him. These kind of things, if you go through the genealogies, I got out a lesson that I did on that years ago, and I'd forgotten it. I hadn't done it here, I don't think, in the whole time I've been here, but I'll try to do that before too long. There's several things. Sometimes we read through the genealogies, man, that's just boring. Let's skip over that. But there are things that I think are intended to be repetitively gotten across to kind of get it into our head through these. All right, anything else there? Chapter 12 and 13. We've got Abram's journey. Where was he originally? Ur of the Chaldees. Where is he by the time we get to Genesis 12 and 13? Haran. That's when God calls him to come into the land of promise. There he is. His father has died, and now he's going to be taking this group, along with his nephew, Lot, and some others. you're going to find that making their way down. What's chapter 12 about with regard to that journey of Abraham? Okay. What do you notice about the first giving of the promises? Are all of them given? In a sense, there is maybe a little statement of the messianic hope that is given. It's detailed a little bit more later, especially in chapter 17, when we deal with that with the circumcision covenant that we'll look at next time. But what else? Is the land stated in chapter 12 when the when the promise is given? No, the land promise isn't given. You're going to find it in chapter 14. You don't find it there in chapter 12. What else do you find in 12? He goes down into the sojourning into Canaan. Then where does he go? Egypt. Why? Okay, what's he do down there? King does them well, but what the Pharaoh, what does he decide about Sarah? Do what? Okay, she was fair to look at, and just remind your kids sometimes that they think you just look old and we've got the wrinkles and we're ugly. Figure out how old Sarah was when they went in there, and she was still pretty, and he still liked her. So there's some hope for us older folk. Now, what happened then? Okay, he got plagued as a result of it. He says to her, "You take her and get her out of here." And so they go back into the land. Now, what happens when they go back into the land? That's chapter 13, right? Now what do we have? Does he go back in richer or poorer into the land? Richer, and he's going to get even richer still. And he goes back into the land. What do you notice each time that he stops and God has talked to him and he remains at a place for a little while? What does he do? Builds an altar and worships God. And that's something where he puts that faith to use. Now, when you have many of those who are Baptists and Calvinists talking about the idea that chapter 15, that Abraham believed God and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, we're going to talk about that for a minute. But they take that as a statement and they read that faith only. That this is just the first time Abraham's had any faith at all. And he suddenly gets this thought of faith and he was saved at that point. Does that fit the story? Absolutely not. First, he left because of the desire to be with God and to go where his father was wanting to go and carry the things of God. Now what happens? Now he goes through the land. He continues to worship God. He goes into the land of Egypt, and he comes back still serving God and still wanting to do what is right before him. Does he sin at times? Yeah, he does. And he's punished for it. But there is not just that faith-only moment in time that you have of Abraham. By this time, he's been serving God the vast bulk of his life. Now, in chapter 14, what do you find? War of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. Which side was Lot on? You have the 5 that are there. You have the 4 that are taking him into custody, as I think your point. That they took him into custody, and so that's why Abraham got involved in this. So when he gets involved, what happens? King of Sodom, after all of this, says he'll give him all the spoils. Just give us our men back that went to fight with you, and you can keep all the spoils. What did Abraham say to that? No way. I'm not going to say that unless you say that Abraham was made rich off the king of Sodom. The only thing that Abraham did after this was, with regard to giving or receiving, had to do with receiving the amount of food that had been given by Abraham to those who were soldiers of the others. And what else? Giving a free will offering unto Melchizedek, priest of God Most High. And then they go back from that point. By the end of chapter 14, what do you notice about Abraham with regard to his wealth? What's it like now? Even greater. He's abounding in that wealth that God has given him. So now we come to chapter 15. There's this promise that is related again. When you look at the chapters, put those in your mind in Genesis for where you have the chapters of the promises God gives to Abraham. Because when you have all of those in your mind, it's going to help you with regard to going to things and finding them that you need, and especially with a lot of it regarding messianic prophecy, some of the things regarding premillennial ideas that are totally seen to be debunked, if you understand that. The first time he gave the promise was chapter 12. Second time is in chapter 15 here. You're going to see it in 17 with regard to the seed, and you're going to see it further as well. But we're going to talk about that as we come to it. All right, chapter 15. What's the first one that's given? Well, it actually goes back to 12. That you'll have a great nation. They'll be as the sand or dust of the land, or you could have it as the stars of heaven without number. Genesis 12 verse 3 then points out what? There's that messianic hope. Through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed, is the point that's made. What is particularized in chapter 15? The land promise. Somebody read for me, please. That should be a colon in there between 15 and 18. But chapter 15, verses 18 through 21. Who will read that? Anybody? Okay, go ahead, Dallas.
It says, on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, to the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, the Hittites and the Perizzites, the Rephaim and the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Gershites, and the Jebusites.
Okay, he gets to read from now on for all the nations. Good job. Exactly. All right. You have the land that's given there from the river of Egypt. What's the river of Egypt? You tend to say Nile, but that's never called the river of Egypt. The river of Egypt was a river that was at the border of Egypt. It's what today is called the Wadi El Arish. It's along a little valley that's there that sometimes is dried up during the dry season, and in the wet season there will be a river running down through there. But the Nile is never called the river of Egypt. It's called the river of life in Egypt. It's called several other things. About in the water in the midst of the land is another term that the Egyptians had for it and others did. You've never seen it called the river of Egypt. Go ahead.
Can you point this out on that map?
Yeah. Let's go back over there. Okay. You'd have, here's the, that was good, wasn't it? Hit the wrong thing. Here we go. Right about in here is where we're talking about, in that little place there. Let me see if I can, yeah. Here we go. Do you see this little river looking real white? And then it has some growth right there. That's the Wadi El Arish. that's where you have the border of the land is supposed to go to. And that's exactly what the border is given when you come into the times of David and Solomon. Going there to the river of Egypt is where the land is said to be at its south border. Anything else there? The river of Egypt to the what? The great river, the river Euphrates. The Euphrates is up here. Now, what's pointed out in David's time is that David went to recover territory at the river Euphrates, the great river, the river Euphrates. 3 times you have them naming the river Euphrates as a place where they had that power over, that they were the ones who took charge of. Typically, what you'll see is that premillennialists think they have this place or this land promise never fulfilled because they never had either the Nile River as a boundary or the river Euphrates. Number one, the Nile wasn't the river of Egypt. The Wadi el-Arish was, and they went to that. And then 3 times in the Old Testament, you have them recovering or having a boundary given of the great river, the river Euphrates. So yes, they had done exactly what God said they would do. Now, why was it not given during the time, that land, why was it not given to Abraham at that point? The wickedness of what? Amorite is not yet full. Now, what Dallas just read, if you remember there in the 15th chapter, verses 19 through 21, you had the Amorites mentioned, you had the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, the Kenites, the Kenzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Rephaim. Now, all of those are also listed as what they overcome later on in the Old Testament. It's the nations that are there. During the conquest that you see of Joshua, all of those are mentioned as having been spoiled by the people when they took that land. As you go on over, you notice they overcome them in their fullness as well. The point of Joshua is, when you get through with it, that not one thing that God promised has failed. And so, if that's so in the time of Joshua, and now they go and reclaim that land, you can't reclaim land that you never had. But in the time of David and Solomon, they reclaimed this land. What does that tell me? They did get exactly the land that God had promised. Anybody got any questions, comments there? I know we're hurrying through this, but anybody got anything? Okay. Now, that last point then, Genesis 15, verses 18 through 21, that tells us that that third promise, the land promise, is given, and it is made exact with regard to borders and with regard to the land of these particular nations. Anything else there? Anybody got anything else? All right. So now let's try to do this again. We got the first 10 chapters. Chapter 11. What you think about is something to overview chapter 11. What happened? Louder. Okay. The Tower of Babel is there, the confusion that happened. Also, the genealogy of Shem onto Abram. Chapter 12. Okay, promises to Abraham, and what happened? He sojourns into Canaan, to Egypt. If he does that in 12, what does he do in 13? Comes out of Egypt and into Canaan, and that's where he separates from Lot too. We didn't say anything about that one. In chapter 13, I forgot to cover that. What happened there?
The land can support them.
Do what?
The land cannot support their herds.
Okay. Tells you it has to be pretty big, doesn't it? So what did Abraham say to Lot? You go to the right, I'll go left. If you go left, I'll go. Okay. And so what did Lot choose? All right. He chose the well-watered plains, it looked like, over towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Turned out to be a bad choice, didn't it? We're going to find out. What seems like it might be good materially often is something we need to give a second look at. It might be the worst thing we can do spiritually. What about chapter 14? Okay, you got the war of the 4 and the 5 kings, and you've got Melchizedek and Abram being looked at, and lastly, chapter 15. Okay, you got the second giving of the promises to Abraham. Let's remember that one in there. Okay, anybody got anything else on those? Let's do a few questions. Number 1, where did Noah's descendants journey and dwell? All right. The plain of the land of Shinar. Where'd you get that? 11:2. Okay. Name 3 places where Abram built an altar. All right. Shechem. Where'd you find that? Okay, at the Oaks of Mamre. That's in 12:7 or 12:7. It says. Next one. Bethel. 12 what? Okay. Hebron at the Oaks of Mamre. Where's that? 13:18. Okay. Why? Well, I know we already answered that. How many of his men did Abram lead against Lot's captors? All right, 318. Said trained men. Trained men of war is the statement literally, if you get out of that. In other words, soldiers. How in the world did one man have what basically is a small army? That tells you a little bit about his wealth, doesn't it? And his ability to withstand others. All right, what animals and birds were used to confirm God's promise to Abraham? There's a good list of them here. 3 what? 3 heifers, 3 she-goats, 3 rams, and then what? Turtle dove and a pigeon. Okay, young pigeon are there. Is that the first one? Okay. All right. Let's go over here. God said to Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy, okay, unto this, my father's house, to a land that I will show thee. Okay. After their separation, Abraham dwelt in the what?
Land of Canaan.
Okay. And where was it? I've lost my place here. Okay, here we go. Lot in the what? Cities of the plains. Okay. Number 7. Melchizedek was king of what? Salem and priest of God Most High, it says. Look at that, number 9. God told Abram that his seed would be afflicted for how many years? 400. Where was that? Egypt. That was given. You have a more particular number given by Stephen as he's speaking to the Jews that were not receiving of the Christ. All right. Let's see. Draw that circle. Number 2, Lot was the son of Haran. Okay, chapter 11, verse 27. Abraham was how old when he left Haran? All right, 75 years old. Hadal, Shinab, or Bera, which one of them was the king of Sodom? Bera. Number 10, the Lord said, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Okay. Let's, what'd you get for number 1 of the true false? True. 11:3. Number 2? True. That's in 11:26. Number 3? False. Terah was 105 and Sirach was 230. Number 4. True. 12:17. 5. False. 6. False. 7. True. 14:13. 8. False. 15:4. And 9. False. 15:12. And 10. True. 15:13 through 21. All right, now extra, but there's an extra to the extra too. Whoops, I didn't do that. Sorry about that. Give 2 New Testament references where Abraham believed God and was counted or imputed unto him for righteousness is found. Romans what? Okay. Romans chapter 4 and then verse 3. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 6. There's another one. All right. James 2 and in verse 23. All right. Anybody else got anything we might have missed that you want to cover real quick? Okay. Not, we'll have Kurt teaching the next lesson there in that lesson number 4 on Genesis 16 through 19.